Hello and welcome to the Lutheran Worship Podcast presented by the Center for Worship Leadership at Concordia University, Irvine. I am your host, Kip Fox, joined as always by my co-host and the director of the Center for Worship Leadership, the Reverend Steve Zank. Steve, how are you today?
Hey, Kip. All right, man. How are you? Good to see you.
I'm doing great. Hey, I'm excited. Today we are going to share something that is near and dear to my heart, which is the topic of my master's thesis, which the title of was Martin Luther's Theology of Music, a Case for Diverse Creativity in Worship.
Nice.
So today what we're going to do, and this will take us a few episodes, but we are going to trace the lines of history back all the way to Plato and eventually get ourselves to Martin Luther and then eventually get ourselves all the way up to present day and talk about just the influence that Plato had as a philosopher, that Augustine had as a theologian, and what Luther saw in those two folks and how he responded and what that means for us today.
And what I love about your thesis, by the way, Kip, it's a great thesis, and we're excited to share with you on the podcast. One of the things I love about it is that it's a whole approach to thinking about beauty, and it sort of opened my eyes to the reality that not everyone thinks about beauty the same way. It's a very complex idea and what beauty does and what music does and what's okay, what's not okay, and what's the purpose of music and beauty. And this is a great, so if you have a kind of philosophical questions about music, its power, its purpose, this is going to be a really fun conversation in the next few episodes about this. And thanks for guiding us in that conversation, Kip, with your work here on the thesis.
The way I want to start is just to walk you through a little bit how I got to this place where with all these pages of words put into a thesis. And I was going through a few years back, went through Concordia University Irvine's master's program, Master's in Theology program, and which I highly recommend. It was a ton of fun. And while I was going through that, heading out to class there, I did some online. I went summers to do some, what are those called?
Probably intensives or...
Intensives. Yeah. I knew it started with an I. So went to do some intensives, did stuff online. I highly recommend it. During that process, one of my professors pointed out that Mark Mattis had just published a book on beauty, Luther's Theology of Beauty, a reappraisal. And I thought that was really interesting as I work in the arts, in music, and was curious to read it. And I read it and I absolutely loved it. And that book really was the stimulus and the power behind my work on my thesis from then on out. First of all, I'll go over a little bit of what was in that book. So in this book, Mattis covers aesthetics, especially those of Plato and Aristotle, and how Luther distinguished himself from them. Okay. Now, the first few chapters cover medieval theologies of beauty and aesthetic philosophy, and then really, again, contrast that with Luther's writings on the matter. But chapter 6 of this book got into something near and dear to my heart. Chapter 6, Mattis applies this theology of beauty to music and spends a lot of time talking about Luther's love of music, not just his love of it, but his writings on it and his theology behind it. And so from that book, I was able to piece together really this through line all the way back from Plato to Augustine to Luther and John Calvin and the Reformation and how they handled this question of music and the arts differently, and then really applied it to today. And really what I've found is we've got just a gloriously unique theology of music as Lutherans that really compels us to create and be creative for the sake of the gospel. So that's where it all started, and we're gonna start rolling in on Plato here. But Steve, before I get into Plato, what strikes you there?
No, I love it, and Mark Mattis' book is great. Kip and I had the privilege of interviewing him on our podcast, Theology in Motion. So if you're interested in hearing more about his book, you could find it there. It's a great interview. But yeah, I'm glad that inspired you. And I'm glad that the work you did took you down the avenues it took you down as well. And I can't wait to get into it with you today.
Awesome. So as we we head into it here. We talk about beauty as it pertains to a theology of beauty, as it pertains to the arts, and how we understand and interact with the arts within our faith, right? The first conscious and recorded examination of the arts, what we call aesthetics, starts with Plato, all the way back in 429 BC, 429 to 347 BC. Plato was alive. This is, again, if you just imagine 300, 400 years before Jesus walked on this planet. He's the first documented philosopher to have asked a considerable number of questions about beauty and the arts. So when it comes to beauty, Plato believed in a single transcendental form of beauty that is behind all earthly forms that we deem beautiful. These earthly physical forms are an image of the eternal archetypal forms, but they are imperfect. They are only a shadow of the true reality that is beauty. And he also believed that as human beings, our greatest desire is for union with that eternal, unchanging reality. So the marriage of these two concepts means that for Plato, humankind's ultimate aim is to self-actualize through the pursuit and eventual apprehension of the transcendentals, one of them being beauty. So in Platonic thought, we have to rely on our intellect and increasingly leave behind sensations given to us by the physical world. That philosophy is carried into his evaluation of music and other art forms. So for our purposes today, for Plato, art is not simply something to be enjoyed. It's only helpful if it can help us on this path.
Mm-hmm.
Really two purposes on this path: to reach these higher forms and to reach a place in society that is of the greatest virtue. And music for Plato is to be used almost as a tool to do that. Donald Hodges says, music's primary value to Plato was that it could imitate the harmonious balance found in the cosmos. Music's importance stems from the rational contemplation of the proportions found in music as they represent ideal forms, not from listening to music and responding emotionally.
It's a lot of work,
Steve,
Kip.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a lot of work, man.
I don't know if on any given Sunday when the music is playing, you're up there going, okay,
Yeah, that's right.
what are these intervals? And wow, how can I sort of get through those intervals to the greater things?
I got to be honest though. The first time I heard the song "Gone" at the songwriter retreat, whatever year that was, we did that for the first time.
Yeah,
I thought this is a good song, but it's really just it's approaching the song it should be.
right.
Up
It's
there
a shadow.
in the realm. There is a song it's approaching, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's just
Exactly.
it's pretty good, but only
Yeah.
because it's approaching something that's better. That's
Well,
really
just-
that's a burden for
Be
the arts.
thankful. Be thankful that it didn't capture you emotionally in any way. So Plato was a fan of Pythagoras, and we've all heard of the Pythagorean theory, which I won't go into here, but Pythagoras offered the study of numerical ratios within harmony and sort of pointed out how they pointed to this mathematical nature of the cosmos, okay? And so Plato loved that, right? It was all about that, because numbers are not only conventions by which to measure things, but also windows to the eternal world of ideas, okay? Just to kind of wrap that up. So that's the first thing with Plato. The second thing is in terms of how music plays a role in society. Plato was not a huge fan of poetry. And when we say poetry today, we mean sort of, for some folks, it means words on a page that rhyme. But in the sense that Plato uses poetry, he's really talking about song, about lyric and rhythm and rhyme together, right? So the poets of his day would be more like, almost like songwriters. This is what Plato says about poets, okay, and how it's a problem for society. He says, through a poet's pandering to base emotions, an audience abandons reason and sober judgment and gives itself over to inferior passionate feelings. This is to their own detriment, and the same may be said of lust and anger and all the other affections, of desire and pain and pleasure, which are held to be inseparable from every action. In all of them, poetry feeds and waters the passions instead of drying them up. She lets them rule, although they ought to be controlled, if mankind are ever to increase in happiness and virtue. So see, I was pause here. There is a way in which one might resonate with some of this, right? To say, I certainly can get on board with the idea that when emotions get out of control, when there are no boundaries or borders to the passions of of life, right? Of humankind, this can lead away from virtue, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you could even, yeah, go ahead.
Dorothy Sayers has an essay on this. I can't remember the title off the top of my head, but there's an article she wrote. And she talks about pseudo-artists. And pseudo-artists are telling you what to think and how to feel and sort of putting those feelings into you, whereas the true artist is sharing their experience, and the shared connection of experiences draws out feeling. But you could think about this in a lot of ways, how many artists use lyric and rhyme and all sorts of things to manipulate our feelings. And it sounds like Plato's very concerned. He wants the pure mind to be approaching the real things in the transcendental realm that then inspire us to be purer people and not stuck in the material side of things. Is that kind of what we're saying? Right.
Yeah. So the passions of our heart and our body, right? The affective qualities of music are at odds with the intellectual pursuit of higher forms.
And for Plato, if I understand him right, it's not just like you might say, like this song is making us think about bad things in society. This particular song has bad themes in it. But he means actually the idea that the emotions are ruling the self are a problem. Right. And they could be positive emotions too, right? So it's for him, it's emotions and thinking are at a little bit opposed to each other. And he wants thinking to be the thing, and the approaching and the meditating and on these greater things to be what music does. Is that so? We're not just saying bad emotions. We're kind of saying almost all kinds of emotions could be misleading.
Yeah, absolutely. He actually hones in on he says that the only poetry that ought to be admitted in the state are the hymns to the gods and the praises of famous men. Sort of in this again, like only poetry that point us to a higher virtue of the state or to a more evolved or a better society. So,
and if you're listening now and thinking, why so much work on Plato? It's interesting to note that Alfred North Whitehead mentioned that basically all of European philosophy consists of footnotes to Plato. So as you get into this conversation, as Kip unfolds his thesis, this Platonic philosophy is going to find its expression in other places in the Christian faith, especially. So hang on to this thought for a second, because we're going to see it take root and grow into the Christian tradition.
Yeah, exactly. The last thing I'll say then is another quote from Plato, which I loved, which is very succinct here. He says, "There is an ancient quarrel between philosophy and poetry." So that kind of sums it up right there. Now we'll get into, I say in my thesis that Luther ends this quarrel. Okay, so that's hopefully where we're headed. But again, there is a quarrel, there is a battle between poetry and philosophy. Essentially, wrapping up what we just said, which is any art form that gives us, that plays into our emotions, that makes us feel, that distracts us from the intellectual pursuit of the higher forms, is a no-no. Okay? So let's turn then in this next piece here, this second part of our podcast today. We're going to now see how this influenced Augustine's theology of music. Augustine's conversion to Christianity, Augustine of Hippo, or to 430 AD, okay? So this is, is that 800 years later by my math? Pretty good. What's negative 400 minus? No, never mind. So Augustine's conversion to Christianity was heavily influenced by Neoplatonism, as Steve was alluding to earlier. This is due to his coming upon the teachings of Bishop Ambrose in Milan. Okay, so Plato's philosophy significantly impacted Augustine's thought and subsequently his theological works. So we're going to kind of move here from philosophy into theology and see how that transition, where they kind of melded together. So Mattis says this about Augustine and Plato. Both Plato and Augustine think that human nature is best understood as desire for union with eternal, unchanging reality. In such expectation of union with the eternal, the human is defined and fulfilled. So as we start to look through a theological lens, okay, when beauty is evaluated through this lens, the arts are evaluated as a help or a hindrance on this path toward fulfillment. One can draw nearer to God by using the rational mind to discern the higher order of things, or to reach a stronger morality through the various art forms, all while shedding the primitive pleasures of the flesh. Okay? So these two things we covered with Plato are formed then in Augustine's theology of music. Now, Augustine, incredible church father. There's so many amazing works and such a beautiful piece of our Christian history. This is not to go at Augustine as some sort of terrible person that he's not, but it's just to point out what he said about music. And it's important because what Augustine said about anything had a big influence on the Western church for centuries. So let's sort of parallel Plato and Augustine in those two spheres. When it comes to the science of music, standing squarely in that Pythagorean tradition, Augustine found this eternal sweetness in the numbers. He believed that through studying music's ratios and numerical relationships, one could find traces of the eternal. This is what he says in one of his works, De Musica. Since music somehow issuing forth from the most secret sanctuaries leaves traces in our very senses, or in things sensed by us, must not we follow through these traces to reach without fail, if we can, those very places I have called sanctuaries? So essentially saying, if music is coming from these secret sanctuaries, must we not sort of follow Pythagoras and sort of find our way again into that fulfillment through studying the beauty of these things? And he, in contrast to that, he compares people who like to listen to music without understanding the science of it, of the numbers and the intervals. He compares those people to beasts. Okay, which again, the lower passions, right? This is the same idea.
This is Augustine.
Yeah. So for him, there is good reason to value the science of music. The mathematical certainties in music serve to promote the existence of God, and that's a good thing. That's great. We can say that. Luther would affirm that as well. We'll get into Luther and Pythagoras and how he dealt with that. So to wrap it up here on the scientific, mathematic beauties of music, Augustine says this: with a restored delight in reason's numbers, our whole life is turned to God, giving numbers of health to the body, not taking pleasure from it.
So Plato and Augustine are kind of saying, if I hear this right, they're saying, hey, if you just like love music, if you're in the car and you throw on a jam that you love and your hair's in the wind and you're singing along and you're looking at your friend and having a good time, they might be like, hey guys, you're like just beasts roaming through the countryside. Yeah. There's something else going on here with this music that you're missing. It's God's magic formula. I don't know what you'd say. It's a mystical experience, and it should be drawing you into the mysteries of God and the mysteries of the universe and contemplating. Yeah. And this is almost a misuse of what music is for. Is that, am I hearing it right?
That's exactly it. And exactly. You're missing sort of contemplating and peeking through the window of music and into a higher form of the cosmos and this ultimate fulfillment in that higher form. What's interesting when you say that, when he's like, windows rolled down, hair blown in the wind, super loud, that does actually stir in us somebody that, the image of somebody that's sort of, unless it's you, somebody next to you driving by at 90 miles an hour, like somebody who's reckless, who's not thinking, who's a complete emotional human being and all that, right? It's not like this is something that some sort of thought that we just go, wow, I can't even imagine thinking that way. We all have this same sort of judgment of folks when we see somebody getting too emotional or, dancing too rigorously or being fully taken by
or
music.
in my day, forgive me, but it was putting the big bass subs in your tire trunk. So you couldn't put anything else in your trunk. It was just big, huge bass subs. And then you drive around the neighborhood and it was so loud. I had a friend that had one of those cars, and I used to think it was cool. But now looking back, it's just like, man, that's driving through the neighborhood with your bass subs in your trunk, rocking. It's just a little bit rude.
The next time somebody rolls through your neighborhood, with that bass sub just blaring, just think, oh, if only they would peek into the mysteries and the numbers and the mathematics of music and not this ridiculous low end. Okay, so let's move on to this next piece, which is similar in nature, deals a little bit with the passions of the flesh, and is really, these are quotes from Augustine's Confessions, which are very popular, very well known. And some of them you may have even heard, but I'm going to try to dig into some pieces of them and point out some things, and then we'll wrap things up. Okay, so I'm going to walk through 3 big pieces in a section of the Confessions that Augustine, or Augustine as you call him, Steve.
It's both. It's both.
It's
both. Depends on where you're from.
Yeah, so I'm from Napa, California.
Yeah,
and we say Augustine.
You do? Okay.
Yeah. All right. So I pick out these 3 things. So Confessions is a massive work, but Augustine talks about music in a very small piece here. Just bear with me as I read a few of these quotes, okay? And they're all kind of stack on top of each other. Augustine says about music, "The pleasures of the ear did indeed draw me and hold me more tenaciously, but you have set me free," you being God. He's talking to God now. "Yet still when I hear those airs in which your words breathe life, sung with sweet and measured voice, I admit, find a certain satisfaction in them, yet not such as to grip me too close, for I can depart when I will." So Augustine is sort of tiptoeing in here saying, I like music. I love the way that, it soothes me, the song, when it's sung with sweet and measured voice. I find a satisfaction in it, but not so much satisfaction that I can't depart when I will. Almost as if I can't be cast under the spell of the pleasures of music, God.
Yeah, it's like he's being a little bit naughty. He's like, I know I'm flirting here with something, so I'm going to be careful.
Yeah, and we're just talking about just a song, okay? Just music, nothing crazy. Augustine goes on to say, "At times it seems to me that I am paying them greater honor than it's their due," them being melodies and musical surroundings of words, of the music, okay? "When, for example, I feel that by those holy words my mind is kindled more religiously and fervently to a flame of piety because I hear them sung than if they were not sung. And I observe that all the varying emotions of my spirit have modes proper to them in voice and song, whereby by some secret affinity they are made more alive. It is not good that the mind should be enervated by this bodily pleasure, but it often ensnares me in that the bodily sense does not accompany the reason as following after in proper order, but having admitted to aid the reason strives to run before and take the lead. In this matter I sin unawares and then grow aware." So he's basically saying there's this tension. My mind is aided by music, but all of a sudden the bodily pleasures strive to run ahead of it and take the lead. So anytime I catch myself where I'm feeling more pleasure than I am enhancing my intellectual contemplation and understanding through music, I'm sinning. Okay?
There's a nervousness there.
Yeah, exactly.
Anxiety there about that process and how it might lead him.
Yeah, and so I say in my thesis, I say emotion is no longer merely the lowest use of music. It's viewed as almost an automatic path to sin, which is a big thing, big statement. By letting a piece of music move him in his soul before stimulating intellect, Augustine believes he is disrupting God's plan for him. So let's get to the final countdown, the final piece here. Augustine says, "Thus I fluctuate between the peril of indulgence and the profit I have found, and on the whole I am inclined, though I am not propounding any irrevocable opinion, to approve the custom of singing in the church, that by the pleasure of the ear the weaker minds may be roused to a feeling of devotion. Yet whenever it happens I am more moved by the singing than by the thing that is sung. I admit that I have grievously sinned, and then I should wish rather not to have heard the singing." So it's interesting. It's funny because just by a nose, he approves the singing of the music in church, but only for the weaker minds.
Yeah.
And we'll actually see this come up a bit with Calvin as well. So again, this implies that the pleasure that comes from music is somewhat of a cheap trick to use to hypnotize the masses of the faith, like you had said with Dorothy Sayers. Now, there are a lot of people in the church that would agree with this sentiment, okay? It's tempting to side with Augustine when we observe churches that focus on creating highly emotional music experiences without clear gospel proclamation. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the second thing is that it implies there's no need for music in worship. As Augustine is not weak-minded, music is more of a hindrance to him than a help. So really, we kind of close here with this question, is music necessary? And this was a sentiment shared by many church fathers. A lot of writings you'll find, just a lot of tension here about whether or not music should play a role in worship at all, let alone one style or the other. But we'll see, again, as we look towards our present day, how this becomes a bit of a style war or a preference war. We separate sort of highly sophisticated, intellectual, artistic music from, a big subwoofer rolling down the street with a pop groove, right? So, above all else, the two main themes of Augustinian theology of music are that the science of music leads one to faith and salvation, and that the pleasure in the sound of music leads one to sin. We're going to dive into Luther's response to this, Calvin's understanding of this, but Steve, what do you want to say?
It's interesting to me. There seem to be acknowledging the power of music that we all feel and we all know. Like music is a power. It can really move us, and we can feel it. In a communal context, that power is translated into sometimes to manipulation. And there's a concern, like a deep concern for that. And it's not about modern or traditional in this case. One of my professors back in the day, he said there was some convention he was at, and he was sitting back by the organist. And the organist, this is his story. I'm not going to challenge the details, but apparently the organist was playing, and he leaned over and said, "Hey, do you want to see him stand up?" He's like, "Yeah, sure." He, pulled some stops and did some things, and then all of a sudden everyone was standing up. Yeah. And this professor, I think, had some of this influence of the Platonic school of thought and Neoplatonism, and the influence of Augustine must be in his background, because he was very concerned about the way that art could be used, or music could be used to manipulate. And so, it's really kind of cool that we're seeing music's powerful. What do we do with that? What do we do with the power of music? There's like a sense of fear, a little bit, or nervousness in this school of thought.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's, again, I'm excited to eventually we'll get to Luther, but it's exactly that. What do we do with the power of music? And in this case, we see this tradition, or this idea, this theology handed down of handling that power with great caution, to the point of almost eliminating it altogether. And so we'll talk about that in the coming weeks, hear about what Calvin does with it, and what Luther does with it, and what we can do with it. How's that sound?
Awesome. This was fun.
All right. Thanks, Steve. Let's wrap it up. We'll see y'all next week for round 2 of Luther's Theology of Music.